Good morning. Today is Thursday, July 2nd, and we'll be looking at Mark chapter 4. And Mark's gospel is the action gospel, the gospel with a lot of going here and coming there and doing this and doing that, and the imperative words immediately and went and sent. And parables are also in Mark's gospel. Not as many, much fewer than Matthew and Luke, certainly Luke. But parables are also important to the Jesus message and what Jesus was doing. Parables are these stories that tell a larger truth and try to explain, Jesus uses to try to explain what he's trying to do and trying to say. And we talked before about how Jesus is himself like a parable, that he is come to express what God would have us see about the reality of the world that we live in. Jesus as a person in a parable, not a story, not narrative, but flesh and blood and bone. I'm realizing that wasn't one of these sessions, it was a sermon, but if you can go back and watch one of the sermons, you'll see that idea about parables. But parables are also in Mark. Even though there's a lot of action, there's also some talking. So we look at Mark chapter 4 and we see some parables. So the first parable in Mark chapter 4 is a very famous parable. It's been rendered in expressions of visual art, and it's been retold in different ways, and it's in the other gospels as well. It is the parable of the sower. So he was teaching by the sea. So what was his action? It's always action. It's always something Jesus is doing. And he says, listen, a sower went out to sow, and some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it. And other seed fell on the rocky ground where it didn't have much soil and sprang up quickly, had no depth. And so it was scorched, had no root, and it withered. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew and choked it, and it yielded no grain. Other seeds fell on good soil, and yielding 30 and 60 and 100-fold. And he said, let anyone with ears to hear listen. Again, the imperative voice there. I like the parable of the sower because it gives us all a chance to receive the seed and to be the kind of soil that we need to be. But some days we are rocky soil, and some days we have thorns growing among us. It's really kind of no fault of our own, except maybe we're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes the seed falls on the path and the birds eat it. So you try again. But every once in a while, the stars align and things work out perfectly, and we're prayed up enough, and we're meditative enough, and we're released of things that can, control our heart and make us sad or feel guilty or other kind of bad feelings. We can have that fertile soil. I think the beauty of this is that I believe that the sower will always be sowing seeds and trying again to bring the crop fruit through us. We'll always be the soil. Sometimes we're this soil, sometimes we're that soil, but we'll always be there will be an attempt in our direction by the sower. I think that's what this parable really means. Then they asked him about the parables, and this happens twice in chapter 4. He describes and explains the parables. He says that I'm giving you the secrets of the kingdom with this parable, and he likes secrets, so that he wants to keep his identity a secret, so that people may indeed look but not perceive. They may indeed listen but not understand. Because he's saying, do you not understand this parable? Then how will you understand all the parables? The sower sows the word, And these are the ones on the path where the word is sown, and they hear. Satan immediately comes and takes away the word. He explains the whole parable, like tells it out for them, that, sometimes the soil's like this, sometimes the soil's like that. And others are sown among thorns, and those are the ones who hear the word, but the cares of the world, you're often guilty of being in that soil category, lure and choke the word, and it yields nothing. And there are the ones sown onto good soil. They hear the word and accept it and bear fruit. And then he tells the story of the lamp and the bushel basket. And he says in this passage, pay attention to what you hear. The measure you give will be the measure you get. And still more will be given you. Lavish abundance. And this is kind of a way in which he says the first shall be last, the last shall be first, because he says to those who have more will be given, and those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. And so he's talking a little bit about, that once let's take it back to the other parable, once that soil is sown well, it just completely multiplies. So going in the right direction is the best thing to do for the future, exponentially growing more and more, and the Spirit getting bigger and bigger and more important in your life. And he talks a little bit more about this, the parable of growing seeds and these agrarian type parables. And then he tells the parable of the mustard seed. And I like this one. I used Mark's parable in one of my ordination paperwork for the parable of the kingdom, because in this part of the mustard seed, it's the smallest seed on the earth, but it grows up and becomes the greatest, brings forth all these branches so that the birds of the air make their nest in it. And it's every kind of bird that comes and makes its nest in the shade of the mustard tree that comes from the tiniest seed. And then there's also a passage in another gospel that is about the mustard seed being that little bit of faith. The faith of a mustard seed can grow into something great. And so even if you have a small bit of whatever it is it takes to be the humans that God created us to be, it's just a one pinch in the right direction takes us to the next level. And then again, everything's explained in here, the parables usage. And because I guess, again, the disciples are dense in a lot of these things, and they have to have things explained to them and gone over with them. In the very last passage, we're back to action. And we're not, that we've had these parables in chapter 4. And then the very end of chapter 4 is this famous scene in which Jesus says to them, and this was in one of our sermons for the summertime, go across to the other side of the lake. That's the lake, Sea of Galilee, where they are. And they've been in Capernaum in that area up until this point where he says, let's go to the other side. So leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat. And others were, other boats there. They maybe like a regatta. And then there was a storm. And the storm was like beating up the boat, and the people got scared. But Jesus was asleep on a cushion. They had to wake him up. And he said, don't you care that we're perishing? And he's like rubbing his eyes. He's asleep. The boat's getting tossed. And Jesus is asleep. And he woke up and he rebuked the wind and he said, peace, be still. And the wind ceased and there was dead calm. And he said to them, why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? They were filled with great awe and said to another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and sea obey him?" A friend of mine quoted this scripture to me when she was talking about how uncertain we often feel during this pandemic, how to be a person of faith. And life has changed so drastically, so quickly. And there's this need, especially with clergy and people who do helping professions, like we want to do something, we want to help, we want to reach out to people and do things. And because we can't be with other people, I feel like there's nothing you can do. And then we hear the story, and she was like, Jesus was asleep in that boat. He wasn't doing anything. He was resting. And it makes you feel so comfortable to know that, like, okay, it's enough. What you are doing now, you are praying for your neighbors, you are reaching out to a handful of people, checking on them, you are making contributions to whatever charity you can do, whatever it is you're doing, your morsel, your mustard seed of faith being put into the world is good enough. Sometimes you just need to take a nap during this storm, because Jesus did, and it still turned out okay. Chapter 5, we continue with more of the action of the Gospel of Mark.